What started to be simple call to plumber unfolded to one of Britain's most grisly crime stories. If you guys enjoying crime stories, please support this channel by subscribe, share, like, and comment. We really appreciate it. Dennis Nilsen, one of the UK's worst ever serial killers, was caged for life in 1983 after murdering up to 15 men he picked up from the street. Nilsen, from the Frasburg in Scotland, strangled or drowned his victim before dissecting them between 1978 and 1983. The series will take a closer look at the crimes and conviction of the sadistic serial killer. Terrifyingly, the house where serial killer Nilsen, known as the Maxwell Hill Murder, committed two gruesome crimes is still in London to this day. It is currently up for sale, and pictures of the House of Horrors show the chilling former home of the killer. Dennis Andrew Nilsen was born on 23 November 1945 in Fraserburgh, Aberdeenshire, in the second of three children born to mother Elizabeth Dottie Whitey and the father Olai Magnus Mokessane. The marriage between Nilsen's parents was difficult. His father did not view married life with any seriousness, being preoccupied with his duties with the Free Norwegian forces and making little attempt to spend much time with or find a new home for his wife. After the birth of her third child, Nilsen's mother concluded she had rushed into marriage without thinking. The couple divorced in 1948. All three of the couple's children had been conceived on their father's brief visit to their mother's household. Her parents, Andrew and Lily, who had never approved of their daughter's choice of husband, were supportive of their daughter following her divorce and considerate of their grandchildren. Nilsen was a quiet yet adventurous child. His earliest memories were of a family picnic in the Scottish countryside with his mother and siblings of his grandparents' lifestyle. Nilsen's siblings, which is Ola Jr. and Sylvia, occasionally accompany Nilsen and his grandfather on these walks. Despite only being 5 years old, Nilsen vividly recalled these walks as being very long along the harbor across the wide stretch of beach. He later described this stage of childhood as one of the contentment and his grandfather being his great hero and protector, adding that whenever his grandfather was at sea, life would be empty until he returned. By 1951, Nilsen's grandfather's health was in decline, but he continued to work. On 31st October 1951, while fishing in the North Sea, he died of a heart attack at the age of 62. His body was brought ashore and returned to the White family home prior to burial. In what Nilsen later described as his most vivid childhood recollection, his mother, weeping, asked him whether he wanted to see his grandfather. When he replied that he did, he was taken into the room where his grandfather lay in an open coffin. As Nilsen gazed upon the body, his mother told him his grandfather was sleeping, adding that he had gone to a better place. In the years following the death of his grandfather, Nilsen became more quiet and withdrawn, often standing alone at the harbor watching the herring boats. At home, he seldom participated in family activities and retreated from any attempt by adult family members to demonstrate affection toward him. Nilsen grew to resent what he saw as the unfair amount of attention his mother's grandmother and later stepfather displayed toward his older brother and younger sister. Nilsen invited his brother Olai Jr. popularity. He's often talked to or played games with his younger sister Sylvia, to whom he was closer than any other family member following his grandfather's passing. Dennis Nilsen confesses to police of committing 15 murders in February 1983 after they visited his home at 23rd Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill, North London. He could reportedly only name 12, however, and he was only charged over 6 murders. He was jailed for life in 1983 and died in 2018. Stephen Dean Holmes was just 14 when he was killed by Nilsen on December 30, 1978. Nilsen's first victim was 14 when he met the killer in a pub. The evil killer then invited him back to his house before killing him. Nilsen kept his body in his flat for several months and even slept beside it. Kenneth O'Cadon was a Canadian tourist who spent the day sightseeing with Nilsen. A Canadian tourist who spent the day sightseeing with Nilsen in 1979 after meeting him in a pub, before ending up at Nilsen's flat after agreeing to dinner and further drinks. He was one of only a few of Nilsen's victims who was recorded as a missing person. The young man was strangled with the lead of a set of headphones as Nilsen listened to a record. Martin Duffy, killed May 17, 1980. Martin Duffy was 16 years old, was homeless, and accepted Nilsen's invitation to stay the night at his house. He was killed by strangulation and drowning him in the kitchen sink before bathing his body on May 17, 1980. 2 days later, Duffy's body was placed beneath the floorboards at Nilsen's home. William Sutherland was murdered on August 20, 1980. William from Edinburgh was 26 when he crossed paths with Nilsen and was killed at the Melrose Avenue address is Cricklewood in August 1980. Sutherland occasionally worked as a male prostitute and met Nilsen in a pub in the Piccadilly Circus, and the pair returned to the killer's flat. Nilsen could not recall precisely how he had murdered Sutherland other than that he had strangled. An unidentified man killed September 1980. Nilsen could only remember about his fifth victim was that he was an Irish laborer with a rough hands who wore an old suit and jacket. He was estimated to be between 27 and 30 years old. He had met this victim in the Cricklewood Arms in the late 1980s. Another unidentified victim killed October 1980. Nilsen's sixth victim was described by the monster as a slender male prostitute. He said he was aged between 20 and 30 and of either Filipino or Mexican descent. Nilsen met this victim in the Salisbury Arms in October 1980. Another unidentified victim killed on November 1980. The victim was described by Nilsen as being an English vagrant in his 20s, whom he encountered sleeping in a doorway at the top of Charing Cross Road. Nilsen, who killed the man at his Melrose Avenue address, said he believed this victim's life had been one of long suffering. Nilsen commented that killing him had been as easy as taking candy from a baby. Another unidentified victim killed between November and December 1980. The last victim to be killed in 1980 was long-haired hippie aged between 25 and 30. Nilsen met him in the West End after the pubs had closed. The victim's body was beneath the floorboard of the flat until Nilsen removed the corpse cut into the three pieces and then returned them under the floorboards. He burned the remains 1 year later. Another unidentified victim killed January 4, 1981. Nielsen's ninth victim was described as an 18-year-old blue-eyed Scot who wore a green tracksuit top and trainers. Nielsen met him in the Golden Lion pub in Soho in early January 1981. He was murdered after taking part in a drinking contest with Nielsen at the Melrose Avenue. Another unidentified victim killed February 1981. Nilsen did not recall much about this victim, other than the fact he was originally from Belfast and was in his early 20s. They also met somewhere in the West End after the pubs had closed. The victim was strangled with a necktie and his body before being placed beneath Nilsen's floorboards. Another unidentified victim killed on April 1981. Nilsen met his next victim, an English skinhead aged approximately 20, at a food stall in Lancaster Square in April 1981. He was lured to Nilsen's home with the promise of meal and alcohol. Nilsen hung this victim's naked torso in his bedroom for 24 hours before placing the body beneath the floorboards. Nilsen later claimed to have fabricated this victim. Malcolm Barlow, killed on September 18, 1981. Malcolm Barlow, then 23, was an epileptic orphan who had spent much of his life in care. Mr. Barlow was the final person to be killed by Nilsen at the Melrose Avenue address, after the killer had helped the young man to get medical help when suffering a seizure. Malcolm went back to Nilsen's home to thank him for his assistance but was killed. Barlow's body was stowed in the kitchen cupboard as there was no further room beneath his floorboards before the psycho dissected his corpse. John Howlett, killed on March 1982. I'm so sorry, I don't have much information or picture of John Howlett. John Howlett was killed at Nilsen's second address, which is on 23rd Cranley Gardens, in March 1982. The 23-year-old had met Nilsen in a pub near Lancaster Square before returning to his flat. Howlett awoke to find himself being strangled, and Nilsen drowned Howlett by holding his head underwater in the bathtub for 5 minutes. He then dismembered his body and flushed various organs down the toilet and put large bones out with the rubbish. Graham Allen, killed on September 1982. Graham Allen, believed to be Nilsen's 14th victim. Tourist Graham Allen, 27, had been attempting to find his way to Shaftesbury Avenue in London West End, but he bumped into Nilsen, who invited him back to his flat for dinner and subsequently killed him. Allen was strangled with a ligature as he ate an omelette Nilsen had cooked for him. His body was identified from dental record and heel fracture to his jawbone. Dissected portion of flesh and small bones from the body of Allen subsequently blocked the drain at Cranley Garden. Nilsen was not charged over his murder. Stephen Sinclair, killed on January 26, 1983. Heroin addict Stephen Sinclair, 23, was said to be Nilsen's final victim. Sinclair, 20 years old, was also killed at 23rd Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill and was Nilsen's final victim. He was a heroin addict who engaged in acts of self-harming. Nilsen encountered Sinclair in Oxford Street where he first bought the youth a hamburger before suggesting that Sinclair accompany him to Cranley Garden. After Sinclair had consumed alcohol and injected heroin at Nilsen's flat, Nilsen strangled him to death with a ligature. He was one of the victims Nilsen identified by name, and he was charged with his murder on February 11, 1983. The 68 years old necrophile also confessed to having sex with the dead bodies. He murdered 3 males in the Crankley Garden house he resided in between 1981 and 1983. Nilsen often hid the bodies in his London home, his crimes going undetected for several years. He attempted to dispose of the corpses by boiling the heads, hands, and feet to remove the flesh. Police caught the criminal after neighbors complained about the stench. Human flesh was then found blocking local drains. The serial killer was only caught by police after moving to the flat where he lived in the attic. After complaint about a foul smell, a plumber named Mike Catran found 30 to 40 pieces of human flesh beneath a manhole cover, leading to Nelson's arrest. Mike Catran discovered the drain packed with the flesh-like substances at Dennis Nilsen flat. He was jailed for life in November 1983 with a recommendation he serve a minimum of 25 years. Following his conviction for 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder, the sentence was later upgraded to whole life tariff. How Dennis died. Serial killer Dennis Nilsen spent his final hour in his cell in excruciating pain with the internal bleeding his inquest has heard. Nilsen, who admitted murdering at least 15 men and boys in 1970 and 80s, died in May 2018 at HMP Fulstaton in East Yorkshire, 2 days before he had been taken to hospital with abdominal pains. The 72-year-old, known as the Marshwell Hill murder, underwent an operation but later suffered a blood clot. Nilsen's inquest at Hull Coroner Court heard he spent his final hours lying in his own filth as he suffered a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. His medical cause of death was given as a pulmonary embolism and retroperitoneal hemorrhage linked to the ruptured aneurysm. A report from the Prisons and Probation Establishment stated that Nilsen had been left deteriorating for 2.5 hours after rejecting the opportunity to be seen for longer in the healthcare wings. After 34 years in prison, he died on May 12, 2018. What do you guys think about today's criminal case story? Is it Dennis Nilsen should have some more attention from his mother and grandmother after his grandfather deceased? Or should his mom need give more fairly caring love between him and his sibling? Would this crime would never happen? Or is it he just born to be killer? Please comment below. Thank you for enjoying the video from start to the end. Please consider subscribe and share. Thank you so much and enjoy your day.